Hello, welcome back to another riveting episode of Mo's Minute. It is still February, so we're still here in San Francisco focusing on President's Day, well, President's Month in terms of the historian. And we're focusing on the presidential visits in San Francisco. Hopefully you saw last week's episode about Harry Truman's speech at Golden Gate Park. But here today, we're at the Palace Hotel, which is beyond gorgeous, talking about President Harding's visit in 1923. So, like I mentioned before, every sitting president except for Donald Trump and George W. Bush has visited San Francisco during their terms. And President Harding obviously was no different. This tradition started with Rutherford B. Hayes in 1881, I think? Something like that. So President Harding was no different. And, okay, before we get into that, let's do a little bit of history about this hotel. So this is probably one of the oldest buildings in the city. It was first built in 1875 and even survived the 1906 earthquake. Well, kind of. I say kind of because it was so damaged by the earthquake that they tore it down and then rebuilt it in the exact same spot. So this is sometimes known as the New Palace Hotel. But regardless, new, old, however you want to look at it, it's gorgeous in here. And it was, it's a 5-star hotel and it's a member of the Historic Hotels of America. So this new building that we're standing in opened in 1909. So, of course, in 116 years, it's seen a lot, right? Yeah, it's seen a lot. But we're really focused on is President Harding's visit. So, President Harding stayed here while he was visiting San Francisco. But it wasn't just his visit that ended at the Palace Hotel. It was also his life. He died in this building in 1923. So, on July 27th, 1923, he had embarked on his Pacific Coast tour, and he was up in Washington giving a speech at the University of Washington. And then he complained that he wasn't feeling so great. So he called his doctor, who was like a wackadoodle. He was like a 1920s, like, weird homeopathic dude, who was like, oh, just rest, and you'll feel better in the morning. And, well, he rested, and then he felt worse later on that night, but they decided it was food poisoning. Well, the homeopathic dude decided it was food poisoning. Another doctor who actually, like, went to medical school decided it was heart disease, so they couldn't really decide. That's never a good sign, but they couldn't decide. So they canceled their weekend in Portland that was coming up that weekend, and instead came here. Why they could rush back to D.C., no one will ever know, but instead they rushed here. And so he's on the train, and he's starting to feel better. And so when they get here on July 29th, and he felt so great that he decided to walk from the train to the car, although that, I don't know how long that trip was. But when he got in the car, he decided he felt crappy again, so they rushed him here. And he was diagnosed, here he had like a major relapse, and he was diagnosed with, well, again, they couldn't decide. Some doctors said it was, and probably the wackadoodle dude said it was gastrointestinal, and the other guy was like, no, I still think it's a heart attack. They couldn't figure it out. So they were treating him with caffeine and digitalis and arsenic and a whole bunch of crap. Yes, I said arsenic. And they confined him to bed rest. So here he is somewhere upstairs in the presidential suite, which I don't know where that is, and I'll probably never see it. But I'm sure, he was just having a grand old time resting up in this gorgeous hotel with his wife reading to him and feeding him bonbons. Well, maybe not bonbons, but whatever, we'll go with it. And then, on August 2nd, he was feeling better, he was sitting up in bed, Florence was reading to him, and it was just a grand old day here in San Francisco. And then his last words were, oh, that's great, keep reading. And then he started convulsing, and they couldn't revive him. And the wife, Florence, decided against an autopsy. Usually when a president dies, they go for an autopsy, but they didn't. So, President Harding was really popular while he was in office, but after he died, it turned out that he wasn't quite playing on the straight and narrow. and a lot of scandals surfaced. The most famous of that was the Teapot Dome scandal, which I'm sure we all heard about in school. And that was like, I think, the first time a cabinet member ever went to prison for stuff they did in office. So, I mean, you just know hearing that is going to end bad. But it also turned out that he was having an affair with someone, and then that affair resulted in his only child. So, there's that. This all came out after he died. So, because of all the scandals that came out, there was always like an air of mystery surrounding President Harding's death. Was it the gastrointestinal attack that the wackadoodle homeopathic dude thought, or was it actually a heart attack that the guy who went to medical school thought? Um, and most historians today feel that it was probably congestive heart failure. He wasn't exactly a healthy president. We've had a few of those in our time. And he showed symptoms of like a weak heart starting in like 1918. So most likely it was a congestive heart failure. And, 1920s medicine wasn't really all that it's cracked up to be. We've come a long way. And, but since he was treated with arsenic, among other things, and he did have a wife that said, hey, no, we don't need to do an autopsy, there was a lot of thought that maybe he had been poisoned. Arsenic is known to be slightly fatal. Just a little fatal. So, yeah, we'll never really know for sure. Like I said, no autopsy. So, yeah, we'll never really know for sure. Probably it was not poisoning, although the arsenic probably didn't help matters. But yeah, that's quite the memorable presidential visit to San Francisco when the guy doesn't leave here alive. So yeah, that was August 2nd, 1923. My grandmother was a whopping 4 days old. And she was born here too. So, while President Harding was upstairs being fed bonbons, my grandmother was being born. So that's kind of cool, actually. That's kind of cool. But yeah, so that is the Palace Hotel, and that is President Warren Harding's visit. Um, so, yeah, there's your piece of presidential history in San Francisco for today. And tune in for the next 2 weeks, and I have a couple more special presidential visits to tell you about then. Thank you.